Hello everybody, welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way and you can too. I'm Matt Anderson. I'd like to introduce our guest today. It's Aaron Schmookler. So Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you just to say a few words to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Yeah, hi folks. I'm Aaron Schmookler, as Matt has told you. And what I do is I train teams to communicate and collaborate effectively. And that really has a lot to do, or when I think about how ordinary people get out of their own way to accomplish a lot of it really comes down to communication and collaboration. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, very much, yeah, I'm excited too, because I think fear is an enormously debilitating topic for people, including me, and certainly one of my key focus areas. But first of all, I just wanted to kick off with a little bit about yours, I guess your own life. And so, for adversity that you face, perhaps the greatest adversity, if you had to pick one thing that's helped you most get out of your own way, what would you say it is?
Well, I'd say it's been a double-edged sword. It's both the thing that helps me get beyond adversity and also the thing that holds me back. And it's the ability to essentially, in different flavors, some form of saying about whatever is the challenge that I'm facing, whatever, or fuck it, or, the hell with it, or, who cares? All of those things both allow me to take action when the deck is stacked against me. It also, I find, prevents me from taking action at times when I could have control over something. So it's useful when I'm dealing with some form of adversity where I don't have control over the circumstances, and then it's destructive when I could have an impact on whatever it is that I'm saying whatever about, but because of my fear, I choose not to.
So give us an example of, start on the positive side. So you said, so when you want to say fuck it and you've got no control, give us an example of how that has helped you.
Well, for my profession, I train people. And so, I give presentations and I do very interactive training programs, and they require a lot of me. The way that I do both of those things are very interactive, and they require a lot of energy, a lot of focus, a lot of real attention that I'm paying to the people that I'm serving. And I also happen to have chronic migraines that really kick my ass. So I don't have control over that. Certainly there have been some things I've found that have an impact. But I'm often called to exert a lot of energy in a bright environment where there's lots of noise and lots of chaos, and to do that while I'm in excruciating pain.
Oh, okay.
And there are certainly times when I say, to hell with it. I've got to go hole up in a dark corner somewhere. But when people are counting on me, I take a breath and I say, whatever. Like, those are the circumstances. This pain. These are the circumstances in which I must succeed. They cannot be an excuse for my not delivering.
So talk about some of the work you do. I mean, our topic that I wanted to focus on for listeners was, so how do you sideline fear so you can take action? So you started out by talking about a mindset that can help. In some ways, it's like, well, fuck it, or what's the worst that can happen? I mean, you actually said it. It's funny. You covered a lot of mindsets that aren't all apathetic. I mean, you said something like, I'm here to help. You said to the people I'm serving. So you also have a very empowered mindset, as if it's my duty to make a difference today, regardless of whether I feel like it or not. So
That's right.
Clearly is a great way to move through fear. Talk about some other strategies that you work into the training that you do to help people get past fear.
Yeah. So we call our training program, we call it adaptability training, which has ingredients of adeptness and also of adaptability. And really, when it comes down to it, the adept adapt to whatever circumstances they're facing. So how is it that we sideline fear? Well, if you think about the most adept among us, it's not that they aren't afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's action in the presence of fear. Right. And I think that's one of the things that the courageous do, is that they say to themselves, my fear is not the point. It exists. They don't try to push it down. In my experience, when you fight fear, you end up in an argument with yourself that's impossible to win. And so to just simply say, my fear is, it exists, and it's not the point. Mm-hmm. Which begs the question, well then, what is the point? And the point has to be purpose. There has to be some purpose that for you can be bigger than the fear. So, for example, what I was just talking about is my attitude of service, right? That serving people, and in particular, serving people so that their work lives are better, mm-hmm. so that their work lives are worth all of the time and attention and heartache that we give to our work lives. To be in service of that is bigger than my fear, and it's bigger than my pain. So in the case of the migraine, for example, right, it's bigger than my pain. I have pain, and there are 10, 20, 30, maybe 3,000 people that I'm called on to serve today. Mm-hmm. And they're having a good work life is much bigger than one migraine. And a migraine is big, don't get me wrong. It looms large. And so there are times, the dishes are never as big as my migraine. I can never wash the dishes when I have a migraine, just about, mm-hmm. right? But I can, which actually takes a lot less from me. But I can go out there and be an energetic, engaged, and engaging trainer when I have a migraine, because these people's lives are bigger than my migraine. So talk about so purpose is a really big part of it, and that's where it becomes very personal. Right. My purpose is not going to be the same as your purpose, is not going to be the same as somebody else's purpose, and service for a lot of people is one of these purposes that can be really big.
So I've coached a lot of people over the years, and my impression is that most people aren't terribly clear about their sense of purpose, and it may simply be because they haven't spent much time thinking about it, or mm-hmm. it seems like such a deep, meaty topic that in our crazy busy day-to-day lives, people dismiss it and say, well, that's a luxury I don't have time for. Mm-hmm. Can you make some suggestions for people on that? I mean, is there anything more useful than, helpful than simply saying, well, you just got to schedule a certain amount of time to do it, even if it's a small amount of time on a weekly basis?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm flip, right, and I don't mean to come across flip, although there is a certain aspect to which it's just decide. Mm-hmm. Decide to have a purpose. I used to teach actors, right? I taught the craft of acting. It's a college class. These are people who've chosen to take the class, although at the intro level, they may not be committed to it. And if I were to give them a scene, they would come out in an acting, we talk about commitment. How committed are you to the character? How committed are you to the scene? How committed are you to the circumstances? If I just give people a scene, tell them to learn it, come on back, and let's watch you act. What they don't do is take risks. They play the scene very safely. They may not even invest themselves fully in the character, so you don't believe the character. And even if you do believe the character as somebody watching the scene, you don't care because they're not committed. So the first thing that I did with a beginning acting class was I invented a game that I called Tale. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially kind of the cloak and dagger meets hide and seek. So you get a group of people. In this case, it's my acting class. You go out to a busy location like the quad of a busy university, or inside a mall if you're willing to, a shopping mall if you're willing to take the risk, and everybody hides, and at the prescribed moment, everybody emerges, and they try to find one another. Mm-hmm. And if I find you, Matt, I don't say, ha, I found you, like I do in hide and seek. Instead, I pull out my notebook, and I say, all right, at 11:11, which is what time it is now, right? At 11:11, Matt stopped by the garbage can to tie his shoe, and I log all of your activity, and I'm logging tail time. And everybody else is logging tail time. And what people would report every time that I did this was that they found themselves behaving in ways that they never would have permitted themselves to do. Right? They would hide behind things. Who cares what all these people are thinking? Right? Somebody told me about seeing a security guard coming their direction, and they didn't want the security guard to see them, not because they thought they would get in trouble, but because if the security guard was talking to them, then their opponents in the game might see them. And so this person, who's a pretty staid person telling me this story, then dove over a hedge so that the security guard wouldn't see them, so that their opponents wouldn't see them. And this happens because people, the design of the game was such that people got committed. It was essentially a choice that they made, that this is what I am committed to not being seen. And so, the devil may care what embarrassment I may cause myself, which is one of the biggest fears that any of us has, is the fear of embarrassment, ridicule, and exclusion. And so that commitment to a purpose allowed them to make choices that were risky, that put them in jeopardy of ridicule, of injuring themselves, diving over the bush. So that's one thing, is you can simply decide to commit. You can surround yourself by people who are committed, which is another element of that game, so that your commitment feels like less of a risk, because even while you may be excluded by the general population, you are included in this community of people who have a like commitment. So there are lots of groups. There's power in joining a group, not just because you get to learn by example, but because that biological need, that evolutionary need that we all have to be and feel included, can happen inside that smaller community.
You said the biggest fear was what?
One of the biggest fears is the fear of embarrassment, ridicule, and exclusion. Right? Those are all the same, essentially the same fear, because we've evolved to require inclusion. That when we're on the savannah alone, we're going to die of starvation, and we're going to die of dehydration and exposure. It's only we are evolutionarily weak alone and strong in groups. That's how we've evolved. And so we're still dealing with those same evolutionary pathways in our brains that may no longer be relevant, or at least as relevant, and they still drive us. The fear of embarrassment, the fear of public speaking, is exactly that fear. That I think it's become trite now to say, but people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying.
Yeah. Now, this might sound like a tangent I'm going off on, but because clearly, it's certainly very clear to me anyway, for those listening, is if you're not clear about your purpose, then make a decision to get more clear, and then I would just add, therefore, schedule some time to do it, even if it starts with 15 minutes a week, but start being more conscious about that, because it's going to give you more clarity in terms of how you want to act, and therefore perhaps you're more motivated to face fears, because even if you say, if one of your purposes is, it's just to be a better parent or provider to my family, then that in and of itself then gets you in more of a service mode. So here's my question as a sort of, I guess it's as a challenge to that, is talk about the rational mind versus the subconscious, because sometimes intellectually, we understand something, or we say, I already know I should live with more purpose, but talk about how we influence ourselves to take more action, even if we know intellectually that our purpose is to serve others. Sometimes it's still not enough to get us to take enough action.
Yeah, well, that's true. I think, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know all the answers to this, certainly.
Yeah, sure.
But my clients, I find a couple of things. One is really sharing about your purpose with people. This is where communication and collaboration are such an antidote to fear and to other things, other forms of adversity, is that if you get a few people together who you can give permission to hold you accountable, you say, here's what I'm up to, and I want you to keep me on target.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they can tell you what to do, but they can say, hey, you said your target was X, and I notice you're doing Y. So that they become, your Jiminy Cricket, so to speak, right? Speaking of the unconscious or the subconscious, or the conscience, right? That our willpower is limited, our conscience is limited, especially by fear. So to enroll allies is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And to really spend time and attention on why you've chosen the purpose that you've chosen. Even if it's not, I don't feel like this is my life's purpose. This is just something that I can do, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you want to provide well for your kids, that may not be your life's purpose. And it may motivate you. That to choose a purpose and take action on behalf of that purpose will instruct you about what may be a larger purpose for you. Mm-hmm. And to spend time on what will the results be. The idea provide for my kids is abstract and intellectual. And the kinds of obstacles that we're talking about are not intellectual. They're really guttural, visceral experiences. So get more specific. What does it mean to provide for your kids? If you're working at 7-Eleven, and I'm not, don't misunderstand that I'm disparaging working at 7-Eleven. But if you're working at 7-Eleven and you don't like it, right? If you're working at 7-Eleven and you have different aspirations, well then, it may not be your life's purpose to pour smoothies, what do you call them? Not smoothies, but the Slurpees, right? It may not be your life's purpose. It may not be your life's purpose to serve a corporate master. It may not be your life's purpose to do any of these things. And if your kids' well-being matters to you, then, and that's why you're at 7-Eleven, to get really specific. What is you want to feed your kids? Great. Do you want to feed your kids ramen? Or do you want to feed them something more nutritional? Mm-hmm. If you feed them nutritional food, what is that going to do for them in the short term? What is that going to do for them in the long term? Do you notice the results? Can you imagine how deeply can you visualize the result of caring for your kids? What do you want for them? Do you want your two kids to have their own bedroom as opposed to sleeping in the living room? Do you want each of your kids to have their own bedroom? What does that look like? What does it look like to provide for your children, to provide for your family? And imagine that. And imagine the costs of not doing it. Our brains are incredibly well designed for storytelling, for visualization, and for being motivated by narrative. And so the more specific you can get in creating the narrative for yourself, the more power you're giving yourself to overcome whatever adversity, whatever fear you may be facing.
Can you just repeat that point again about minds? Because it's sort of, I was focusing on the visualization piece, because I mean, to me, in a way, that definitely does start to impact the subconscious mind as well, on
right.
By thinking about picturing more of what you want and kind of wrapping in the emotions into that. I mean, there's far too much evidence and people that espouse it as being beneficial. But then you said something about our minds are motivated by stories. Can you just say a bit more about that?
So if I were to say to you, Matt, if you were to follow steps X, Y, and Z, you would be able to bring home an extra $10,000 this month. That's one level of storytelling, and it might move you. If I were to say instead, Matt, if you were to follow steps X, Y, and Z, that would give you an extra $10,000 this month. What could you do with $10,000? What could you do with an extra $10,000 this month, Matt?
Well, that's a great question. Well, I could certainly pay more towards other household expenses and actually put more into college education for the two children. And then, well, I don't know how exciting this is, but we're either going to move house or remodel, so there's money we need to, find more for that too. So, well, yeah, because my mother-in-law is going to move in quite soon. So, a multitude of different things. And then, sure, yes, if 10,000 would be enough, but certainly if it was every month, then certainly I'd start pumping more into the business as well to grow that so that more people can be exposed to what are some of the things I'm teaching.
Great. So we've gone from $10,000 a month as a very abstract concept, and now we've gotten a little bit more specific. Move house, college education, mother-in-law, pumping money into your business. Right. And if we go a little bit, let's dig deeper on the college education. So how long is it before your kids go to college?
That's still a way off. That would be another 12 years, 13 years.
So $10,000 a month toward your kids' education over that many years, what is it about that adds up? So what is it about education that matters to you for your kids' future?
That's a great question. Well, I just think it brings a lot of advantages. It exposes them to fields they're not going to be exposed to otherwise, and people. Some of it for me is the people experience and the opportunities, the doors it opens. I just think it provides them more potential opportunities in the future.
And if they don't have access to that education, then what?
I just think they've got a more limited perspective on what's possible in their lives.
And as a result of that, then what? How would you feel if they were to not have that exposure and that kind of scope?
Well, I've not done a very good job as a parent. So yeah.
Now, how motivated are you to do X, Y, and Z?
That's great. And it's
right now you want to know. Okay, Aaron, what is X, Y, and Z? Tell me. I've just walked you through that process as a facilitator of your own thought, right? I only asked you questions, and I noticed your eyes kind of went back, and you considered, and you're kind of playing a little movie out in your head, I'm imagining. Mm-hmm. So one thing that it does is it gets you more intimate with the actual nitty-gritty impact of the desirable and the actual nitty-gritty impact of the undesirable, so that those things become more real. And the other thing that story and visualization does, you talk about the unconscious, and again, I'm not a psychologist, so I may be getting this wrong in terms of the specific mechanisms, and it still is true in some broader sense that our subconscious, is essentially like another way of looking at what our biases are. And our brains are designed to conserve energy. And I put you through this exercise. You expended a fair amount of energy visualizing these things, wondering about these things. You had a shortcut between $10,000 and education good, right? That's a bias. That's an unconscious conclusion. More money equals education equals good. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I said, hang on, let's not buy those biases right off the bat. Let's slow down and look at those biases. And even if you had the idea maybe education bad, by visualizing the potential that education opens up for your kids, you might actually be able to rewire over time and over repetition, rewire that bias, rewire that unconscious conclusion, right? So for me, for example, I know exercise good, and I don't get enough exercise because also exercise pain in the ass, right? So if instead of just buying that, exercise pain in the ass, which I do on a regular basis, if I go, okay, hang on a second, exercise pain in the ass, got it. And also, what is the benefit of exercise? What is the cost of not exercise? For me, one of the costs of not exercise is more migraine days per month. Well, what's the cost of more migraine days per month? Well, more suffering, less attention for my wife and my daughter, and the result of that is a less rich relationship. The result of that may also be I don't get from them the kind of input that I crave from the intimate people in my life. So now I get to go, okay, well, exercise pain in the ass, yes, and also exercise is really rewarding. right? If you were to say to me, Aaron, if you get up at 3 a.m. tomorrow, you'll get I'll give you a dime. I'd say, thank you very much, keep your dime. If you say, Aaron, if you wake up tomorrow at 3 a.m., I'll give you $1 million, I'd say, I'll see you at 2:30. And by visualizing and telling ourselves these stories, then we really acquaint ourselves with the costs and the benefits in a much more profound way that can help us both rewire and motivate ourselves to action that is uncomfortable.
Okay, so this is fantastic. I just want to recap a little bit here for people listening. So it starts, from some of the things you've said, it starts with deciding to have a purpose, which ultimately requires time to do so. And from that can lead to other suggestions such as surrounding yourself with other people who are equally motivated by their purpose and sharing that purpose with others, kind of making it public, increasing the commitment, or also the accountability piece, having people hold you accountable to it because it's going to make you more inclined to do it, and then to think more deeply about why you've chosen this purpose, which certainly for me is one that I haven't really thought through before, or if I have, it's been an awfully long time, and I think I'm slightly embarrassed to admit this, but I think I've become a bit cynical about, a little bit cynical, because whenever people tell you what their purpose is, sometimes it's extreme, it's always moving. Let me put it this way, when it's people I know, or if it's people I'm interviewing, it's moving and I'm really touched. If it's somebody I don't know, if it's just sort of a faceless institution or something like that, then I tend to be more cynical about it, and feel like it's very, it's like that disingenuous sort of, mission statement that you see slapped on a wall of a business, and then you get treated like crap. So I think that's part of my, again, unhealthy cynicism, but to actually think more deeply. In other words, what I'm trying to say, sometimes everybody says they're doing things to serve others in their purpose, but to actually think more deeply about that, for me, is incredibly valuable advice. It's certainly one thing I'm going to do, certainly by this weekend, because I think, obviously, because anything that's going to help me push through fears more is a good thing, but also to sort of dig more deeply, because again, I think my purpose is something I've become clear about, or feel like I've been clear about for quite a long time, and it does drive me, but I just feel like it should drive me more. So anyway, that's why I'm so engaged by what you've just said. But then starting to attach stories and visualization to that even more. I think for many of us, for those listening, it's sometimes we just need more of these reminders so we actually take more action on them. But but again, for you to get me to connect the whole piece around extra income, ultimately making me feel like I don't go to my grave feeling like a bad parent. That's impressive.
And I didn't do that, right? I just asked you questions, and you may discover, as you struggle or to do X, Y, and Z in order to get that extra $10,000 a month, you may discover, what this is doing. Doing X, Y, and Z takes me away from my kids, and if I think about what I really want for my kids, as I'm taking this action, I'm getting information from having done this action. I'm going to stop doing X, Y, and Z. Because while it is getting me this extra $10,000 a month, I notice it's really taking me away from my ability to be a present father. And I think that my presence as a father is going to make me better able to provide them with perspective, that they're loved, that they're cared for, that I can give them live one-on-one feedback that perhaps the education isn't going to be able to give them. And so I'm going to become that education instead. And I can serve that same purpose of providing really well for my kids by not doing X, Y, and Z and letting that $10,000 go and knowing that I've made a really clear, sound decision on the basis of the information that I garnered by doing X, Y, and Z. And I'll make one adjustment to the recap that you've done so far, and I'm impressed with the detail with which you kind of brought. When I found myself going, wow, it's so exciting that we've talked about so much in so short a time. The one adjustment that I'll make is that you don't necessarily need to give time to your purpose in the sense of, I'm working at 7-Eleven and I really want to own my own company. That's really my purpose, is to own my own company. that instead of necessarily doing 15 or 20 minutes a day or whatever it is, that you give the time instead to noticing how your actions serve that purpose. So I'm working at 7-Eleven and I'm putting away a little bit of money every month so that I will later be able to afford that extra 15 or 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
That you spend the time giving attention to how what you're doing serves your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a little hit of dopamine every time you see that you've made incremental progress toward your purpose.
Yeah.
And eventually that dopamine will build up to the point where you can take more and more dramatic action toward your purpose. And the more attention you give to doing only things that serve your purpose and discarding things that don't, and connecting the things that you must do to your purpose, like paying bills. Like, I've got to pay my bills because, well, not just because I like my phone and I want it to keep working, but because if I'm going to have my own business, I need to stay on top of bills. I need to keep a great credit rating, right? Those things are serving the purpose. And so you keep getting that little dopamine hit, and that builds and builds, and the more attention you give it, the faster it will build to your ability to take greater risks, to take bigger actions toward your purpose. And so it's kind of like slowing down so that you can move fast.
Can you also talk about doing things outside the comfort zone? Because I would imagine that, the dopamine piece is going to build confidence to take bolder action. Certainly one would hope so. But can you talk about that a bit more?
About the comfort zone?
Well, about doing things that are uncomfortable, because that's, to me, it's part and parcel of not confronting fear, is only doing things that are comfortable. Well,
I think one of the things that people do is they buy their biases, right? That I'm no good at public speaking, right? That may or may not be true. You're afraid of public speaking, right? If I speak in public, people will ridicule me, or people will not like what I have to say. That's one of the fears, right? That creates that comfort zone out of which there's discomfort. So one of the mistakes people make is they just buy that. They just say it's true. The other mistake that people make is to go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say, no, they won't. They'll love me, right? To kind of try to convince yourself that what you believe isn't true. And then once again, you're in an argument with yourself where you can't win, because you can always outmaneuver yourself in whatever direction you want to. Instead, I think there's kind of I don't know if it's a middle road or just kind of leaving the path altogether and bushwhacking to say, that's right. If I go and do public speaking, or if I step outside my comfort zone in any way, these consequences may occur. And also, maybe they won't. Right? So you can tell yourself, you can essentially, in improvisation, there's a tool called yes and. You can say, yes, I have this fear, and this fear is reasonable, and it's well-founded, and also, I will survive any of that stuff. Or if I don't, then at least I will have gone down swinging, and I think of myself as somebody who's willing to go down swinging, and so I'm going to create another identity for myself. So that's one strategy, is this kind of yes and, create and embrace a paradox of yes and also no. Another thing I heard on another podcast recently, I loved. I wish I could remember who it was who was talking about it. They talked about something called enclothed cognition, and there's research that shows that if you put on a lab coat before doing kind of exacting work, like working on a spreadsheet, that you will be better at that task if you're wearing a lab coat than if you're wearing, say, a painter's smock. And if you're asked to do creative work in that same lab coat, you will be worse at doing that creative work than you would be at doing that creative work wearing a painter's smock. But there's something about the way we clothe ourselves that affects the way that we think. So the clothes affect the cognition. And so this guy talked about imbuing some characteristic in a piece of clothing, and then putting that clothing on in order to embody that characteristic. And so if you're looking for boldness, you think about who's somebody whose boldness I admire. If you're like, for me, as a result of listening to this podcast, I thought, one of the things I want to be able better to do is to focus on a task or focus on a project and just do it without distraction and really work through it without allowing myself to, say I don't feel like it anymore. And I thought, boy, the story of John Henry is a great example of that, right? I mean, he must have, his muscles must have been burning by the time he beat that steam engine. And yes, he worked himself to death, and I'll just set that aside for a moment. So what I did is I went on to Amazon and I bought a really ugly hammer necklace, and this thing is, a couple inches across, and it's heavy, and I feel it. So when I want to be able to really put my nose to the grindstone and hammer out some stuff, I put that thing on, and I John Henry it up, and I crank through it, and it's pretty powerful. So that's another way that we can get out of our comfort zone is to, it's kind of like the bumper sticker, and I'm not a religious person, and I really actually appreciate this bumper sticker. What would Jesus do? Right?
Right.
That's because people value the perspective that Jesus had, and they want to make decisions from that same perspective. Well, we can do the same thing with anybody, right? If we appreciate Nelson Mandela's ability to suffer on behalf of others, and we go, all right, what would Nelson Mandela do? That's another great question. To create yourself a little bumper sticker, to put it up on your computer. What would Nelson Mandela do? What would anybody that you admire? Pick a person whom you admire for the qualities that you want to grow, for the comfort zone that you want to leave, and ask yourself that question, and add some enclothed cognition, and now you're really cranking on all cylinders.
So can you give an example of like how you've used that effectively, either for yourself or with the group that you've been training?
The enclothed cognition you're talking about?
Even the concept of asking yourself, what would Nelson Mandela do, or some other person that you admire greatly?
Sure. One of the things that I'll bring it back to the collaboration and communication relationship piece that's a big part of our work, is we ask people while we're going through these exercises. We create these exercises in the groups that we're training that are difficult, that are designed to both be possible and to ensure that the group fails at them repeatedly before they're able to figure their way through it. And we ask them, what are you seeing in your peers that you admire? What are you seeing in your peers that you appreciate? Now, think about those qualities in the workplace. When you are facing a struggle like this, go seek those people out. They may be able to do it for you. They may be able to give you counsel. And what you're doing is you're affiliating yourself also with them. Seth Godin, whose marketing advice I love, says people like us, an important principle of marketing for him is people like us do things like this. And so the more affinity that you can create between yourself and the people who are in your life who are doing the things that you want to be able to do, the more you will identify yourself as one of these people. And people like us do things like this. So if, for example, it's public speaking that you're wanting to be able to do, and you become, you affiliate yourself with people who are good at it, people who love it, people who are passionate about it, and not just as somebody who has this unattainable skill, but as somebody who is like you, somebody of whom you are one. Right? Then it becomes more and more true for you that people like us do things like this, and you grow your comfort zone.
Okay, so it's about finding groups and other people then that are working on the same things, and maybe they're a step or two ahead of you, but they're not so far ahead of you that it's intimidating, or you talk yourself out of spending any time with them. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and finding groups is great. And if you can find those people all among groups that you already are a part of, then that gives it even more power. Because it takes less time to feel like these are people like us, right? That these are people like me. So if Bob, works next to me, and Bob is good at public speaking, or Bob has comfort with public speaking, and that's something that I want to grow, Bob is already one of us. So becoming acquainted with his skill and his aptitude and his love for that is a shortcut that if you go to Toastmasters, which I also would encourage, right? Going to Toastmasters, you become one of us, but when you first walk in, you're more likely to feel like, okay, those are them, and I'm me, and I'm an interloper here. But Bob, you already have affinity with. And so Bob is going to be a shortcut to getting comfortable with public speaking in a way that Toastmasters won't be. And you put the two together, and now you've got, a very powerful program.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, in terms of the work that you do, is something you mentioned when we chatted before, setting up today's call, which was around how much fear is involved, facing fear is involved in the world of communication. And I have to say I was quite surprised, I don't know why, but I was, when you mentioned that, because I don't tend to think of the world in that way. So can you talk about, now admittedly most of the audience, tend to be commission salespeople, tend to be people that, as far as I know, are mostly working on their own. Having said that, there's plenty of people who aren't. So, but keep that in mind as you answer this. It's a less of a corporate audience, but nonetheless, how can people be more fearless in their communication to be effective?
I think it comes back again. At least part of it comes back again to service. We are. At least speaking for myself, and I think my experience in coaching others bears this out, that we are more likely to be afraid if we believe that we're in service of ourselves. That in fact, that's one of the things that we fear, is that somebody will think of our communication as being self-serving. So so one example that I give often is in my younger days, before I was married, I had difficulty approaching a woman to whom I was attracted at all, much less to say something like, hey, how about we go out for a drink or for dinner sometime? I had no trouble at all if a woman, the same woman, dropped something, picking it up and saying, excuse me, I think you dropped something. It might be the same number of words. It's the same physical proximity. I'm communicating with her. The difference is that I'm communicating in the first example, I believed I was communicating with her in self-service, that I want a date. I want to be associated with this beautiful or attractive woman. These are things that I want. I want her attention. So I feel as though I'm self-serving, and so I fear that she is going to see me as self-serving and as less than. Whereas if I'm communicating in service, right, here is something that you dropped, then I have no hurdle. And so to be able to connect the two, to have, as I've learned to build the confidence, the assurance, the self-value, to approach somebody that I'm pitching, for example, and saying, hey, I've got something of value here, and I don't know if you want it, but I'm communicating with you in service of you in case it is something that you want. I know you don't know about it yet, and so I'm serving you by letting you know about this resource that I am. So that's a piece of it. When you talk about the fear of communication, we're often afraid even to tell somebody that they have spinach in their teeth, right? That we know that would be a service intellectually, but and here again you can kind of get into the visualization of it. Well, what will happen if I don't tell them? Well, they'll go out into the world, they'll maybe give some sales presentation and not get the sale because somebody will think less of them because they have spinach in their teeth or because their fly is unzipped. Perhaps even they'll think, well, why didn't Aaron tell me that I had spinach in my teeth? So now my reputation is on the line, And so between those two things, both in service of them and also in service of my own reputation, then maybe I can say, hey, Matt, I just want to let you know you got a little spinach. So, a lot of this moving fast, the ability to communicate quickly, to move quickly, to take action quickly, really comes from slowing down, from recognizing the impacts of things, from delving into that stuff. And then, since we're all guessing anyway, guess in ways that serve us about the outcomes.
I love this piece about communicating in service, because it's true, especially around sales, where almost all the time we assume someone has an ulterior motive as to why they're doing something, so we become increasingly cynical. I mean, I've been talking about this for years, and therefore very wary about how we accept information, because we're always assuming that there's some catch or something else that's sort of right around the corner. Again, with the time we have remaining, I am really keen to learn a bit more about, again, how you incorporate the topic of fear and communication into your work. Because I know you typically work with teams. So what kind of, I guess, where does the fear come up for people that you'd like to address? Is it in handling conflict, or what are the kinds of sort of, because it's relevant to us all, in all likelihood in our work lives. It's certainly relevant in our personal lives as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a book by Simon Sinek called Leaders Eat Last. And I don't remember everything about the book, but certainly a main thesis of the book is essentially that we are biologically incapable of making rational decisions to serve when we are afraid, right? That the brain chemistry of fear creates fight, flight, and avoidance, right? Those are the things that brain those are the behaviors that brain chemistry creates. And so we cannot act in service of the company. We cannot act in service of others, not really, unless we are in an environment that is relatively, if not completely, fear-free. And that's one of the things that we work with our clients to create. And I'll give you another analogy. When you hear about somebody in a platoon in Vietnam throwing themselves on a grenade to save the other members of their platoon, there is no looking at that grenade and thinking, I'm single, and Matt has 2 kids, and there are 11 people in my platoon, and a few of them actually have kids. And if I throw myself on this grenade, then that's one death of one single person, and that'll save Matt, and it'll save Matt's kids from growing up without a father. So why don't I go ahead and throw myself on this grenade? It's not a calculus of that kind. What's happened instead is that this platoon has been, over time, has created an environment of got your back, where we really have each other's backs. And what happens in that environment is 2 things. One is we see the world as we are. And so if I have your back day after day after day, hour after hour after hour, then I see you as somebody who has my back. And if you also actually do have my back, then that experience is reinforced. And now I'm surrounded by people who have my back. And when I'm surrounded by people who have my back, I don't have to think about my own self-interest. I'm training myself, and so is my body chemistry, and so is all of the experience that you are training me with, to live in service of my brothers and sisters in the platoon. And so when the grenade goes down, I just continue that habit of serving others because I'm not afraid in the same way that I would be about serving my own self-interest. And so we help teams to build that kind of environment where not only do we have each other's backs, but it's so ingrained in the fabric of who we are that I'm willing to do that without thought. And so we can do that unilaterally as well. When you go out there with a got your back mentality and you go into 7-Eleven not with the question of how can I get service from the cashier, but how can I serve the cashier, right? Maybe it's just as little as a smile. And how can I serve my actual clients? And how can I serve my boss? And how can I serve my colleagues? And how can I serve the people who work under me? That when you create that habit of service, then you look at other people as less threatening as well. And you also find you get so much experiences of being included that when you live in service of others, when you smile at others, when you pick things up that others have dropped, the gratitude that comes flooding your way also helps to take your finger off that trigger of exclusion and the fear of exclusion. And so you live your life experiencing that people include you because you've served them. And when you live your life experiencing that people include you, then that fear of exclusion never goes away, but it recedes into the distance.
So it's sort of almost like a positive domino effect by the sounds of it, that it really starts with what we began with. And it's funny because even though you didn't mention Nelson Mandela right away, maybe it's just my recollection of the first time I saw the idea that everybody feels courage, but it's facing courage that's the defining thing in terms of handling fear. Well, everybody faces fear, I'm sorry, but it's facing it that is the definition of courage, not that we don't have fear. And so I was sort of, as you were just making that description, I kind of had Mandela in my mind, thinking that it made it easier to understand why people like that, and Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi and people along those lines who truly were so passionate about helping their fellow human being, that it makes it easier for them to therefore take greater risks because they weren't just thinking about their own, I guess, their own individual lives, but also the impact that they were making on the world as a whole. And maybe it's a gauntlet to us all, really, to think a lot harder about the impact that we can all have with the pocket of the world that we get to influence, and how we can do that and do it in a way that's, I can only think of the cliched word authentic, but do it in a real way that means something to us in our heart of hearts. And I suppose only through really reflecting on that, I mean, I have to say that to some degree, or as you said, even if it's reflecting on it in terms of the actions that we take on a daily basis, so that we can see that we're actually taking those actions. Maybe that's the more practical perspective for people that already just feel too busy, but at least keep better track of what have I done today that's helped me make a difference for others, and to keep that focus increasingly elevated. I think it's interesting, and to bring it back to our topic then, will help us be more brave to face the things that we're uncomfortable to do, because it isn't just about our own pure self-gratification now. It's because it's going to make a greater difference for the people that we love, and hopefully many people around us as well. And that's where we kind of need to keep our brain focused and remember. I'm just thinking this out loud, but if other people are doing it, then we can too. And I would say that's one of the things that I've loved about doing these podcast interviews is people, when you actually meet people that have accomplished really impressive things. And I mean, I'll mention this on the show notes, but I mean, you've got some incredibly impressive clients. So I mean, it's not every day I get a chance to talk to someone that's worked with Microsoft and one of the largest pizza franchises in the world. And I know there's other companies as well, but I mean, it's people are much more human when you actually get to talk to them than when you just read about them in books. That's what I'm really trying to say. So,
well, and it's interesting because that brings me kind of full circle to the whatever, right, that we started with, or the fuck it that we started with, is that, there were times that it seemed pretty clear we were not going to succeed, that though we knew what we were doing was valuable, that we knew we were helping our clients, we just didn't have enough of them, and it wasn't financially feasible to keep going. And this is one of the places where it served me to just go, whatever, and set that fear aside. And I don't even face my fears, really. I just managed to let them be, and let them be separate from me and from my goals, and keep going. And what that's done is it means that in sales conversations I don't come across desperate. It means that in sales conversations I'm not trying to get something from them. I really am trying to serve. And this is where tenacity comes in. And I don't necessarily have it every day. There are days where I do say fuck it in the most destructive fashion, and I walk away from my phone, I walk away from my office, and I don't continue to pound the pavement looking for clients or connecting with my network in ways that would serve me and therefore serve potential future clients. And then I wake up the next day and I take a breath and I'm at it again. And I'm reminded also by what you were saying about kind of taking stock of the day and how did I, and slowly building this up. I think about a mentor of mine who said, be gentle. It wasn't even kind. Be gentle with yourself. And so, I'm talking all this highfalutin, go out and serve everybody thing. I don't do that all day, every day. No, but I don't know anybody who does that all day, every day, who acts with that kind of magnanimous, devil may care, let me serve everybody attitude all the time. When we reach a choice point, sometimes we just do it naturally, right? My daughter says, hey, Daddy, will you get me a glass of water? And I'm up and I'm getting her a glass of water, right? I don't even think about it. That's pocket change. Then there are the places where I'm too afraid or feel too much pain or whatever that I'm too obstructed and I just can't bring myself to serve others. And that's I can aspire to doing something about that at some point later. There are the places where I get to make a choice, where I may be faced with a grumpy clerk at 7-Eleven, and I can either respond in ways that serve me, or I can respond in ways that serve them. And if I just make that one choice to serve them, then I strengthen my ability to reach those aspirational places. And more importantly, I stretch and grow my ability to make the same choice the next time.
Sure.
And I don't mean this in any kind of airy-fairy way. This is not, positivity. This really is kind of it's the way our brains, most of us, I think there probably are exceptions, but the vast majority of us are built to thrive this way. And when you read books like The Go-Giver and Servant Leadership and all of that, we learn that this is the mechanics of the human brain. And this is the mechanics of effectiveness. And this is the mechanics of productivity. It's not fluff.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's a great perspective. And again, something all of us can think more consciously about too. So 3 final questions for you. The first one is, who have you become since you started from your most challenging place?
Who have I become? I would say I've become somebody who aspires to serve others. I didn't start this way.
Perfect. Okay. And what's a good first step for people listening?
Think about the impact that you want to have. And so that's one assignment. The other assignment is think about the people, what you admire in people around you. And then spend time with people who are around you, who are having that kind of impact, and who are doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing. And spend time with them, invite them to experiences together doing those things. Invite them to go out and talk about those things, to have a drink and or have some coffee or have dinner and explore what it is to step outside our comfort zone in this way or in that way, to explore what it is to overcome adversity, to explore what are the purposes, what are the motivations that get these people to do the thing you would don't have to be people who, I'm not talking about be Nelson Mandela's friend. I'm talking about your wife. I'm talking about your neighbor. I'm talking about the guy in the cubicle next to you. I'm talking about getting intimate with the people who are already right there next to you, and creating communities within your community that are people like us doing things like this. To quote Seth Godin again.
Yeah, I love that. Could create your own communities. I think that's something. Many of us are too bashful about. We need that extra support to elevate us up.
Yeah. So, and I think to the idea of creating that community from scratch is daunting. Much less daunting is the idea of going out to coffee or getting a drink with somebody who's already in your community to commune on this particular thing that matters to you.
That's lovely, thank you. And then lastly, how can listeners keep in touch with you?
I'm at Aaron, Aaron, at theyesworks.com, so you can email me there. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Aaron Schmookler, SCHMOOKLER. And my company is called The Yes Works. We're in Tacoma, Washington. And I welcome contact from anywhere in the globe, including right here in my own backyard. And those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Aaron. So
Matt, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. So just a couple of notes for those of you listening. I always like to make this reminder that not to put the people that you're hearing on any kind of a pedestal because, actually, Aaron was extremely open about this. Everybody has off days. None of us is perfect. And, therefore, just, take the pieces that we can all learn with. And, you don't have to be perfect in all areas of your life to get what you want. So just, again, work one step at a time on some of these, some of the fantastic suggestions you've heard today. And I would like to thank you for listening very much. I can't imagine you can get some great ideas from this that really, I think, center on the core of what we probably need to start thinking about first in terms of getting out of our own way and facing fears, which is around, obviously, kind of centering on, more around the purpose of what we want to accomplish with our lives. And then other couple quick notes, please do subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Please leave a review, and then all the show notes and so on are on the website, matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. With that, I'll sign off with my favorite question, which was, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken. Thanks so much.